Alright, what's going on, everybody? So I got a request a little while ago to talk about Superheaven's guitar tones and the sounds on the albums. And before I dive into this, I just wanted to say I'm sorry that I'm still catching up with lessons and all these videos. I had a really crazy week. I was out of town all week unexpectedly. Work's been busy, and I've been doing a lot of music stuff. So I'm just going to take this spot to occupy a quick endorsement. I have a new song coming out March 3rd. It's called Novelty Check, and the video will be out March 2nd on my YouTube channel. And if you listen to music on Spotify, you can pre-save it. There's a link on my YouTube page as well as my other social media. I never ask for stuff like this on here, so I'm sorry to waste time. Thanks if you checked it out, appreciate it. Let's jump into the video. Okay, so Superheaven, specifically Jar and ours is Chrome because the EPs and stuff are a little different, but Will Yip did these two records and they sound absolutely massive. A big reason for that is the guitar sound, but I think it's important to realize that it's not just the guitar, it's the bass and the mix. So if you haven't recorded music before, if you're newer to guitar, there's something to keep in mind. Guitar is a mid-range instrument, and an EQ spectrum and a frequency spectrum, when you're recording, you have to take a lot of the bass out when you're recording guitars because that frequency is occupied by the bass guitar and the kick drum. So a lot of times people will be playing guitar in their room or like in a live setting or practice with other band members. You know, the physics of sound are so interesting. Stuff bounces off the walls, or you're playing with other people, and the acoustics of the room can affect that, the PA, all this different stuff. The guitar is meant to take up the mid-range. So if you're playing alone in your bedroom with your amp, you're going to have probably a lot more bass, maybe a lot more treble too. People take out the, a lot of times people take out their mids, but you know, when you're just jamming in your room, it's kind of like whatever sounds good, right? And back in the day, when I was growing up learning how to play guitar, I had a big, like, what you guys would probably not know, that we called jam boxes and stereos and different things like that. I had those in my room. If you're older like me, you'll remember. And I actually had some of this on my YouTube channel way back in the day, probably like 2009 or something. I would play through my stereo. I'd have CDs, and I actually had a tape player in there too. And I'd play the CD through the, I had two speakers, and then my amp below it. And I would just kind of dial in my amp to whatever sounded good. But when you're recording, it's like if you use those settings that you're using with in your bedroom or even live or in a band setting, which you should still be mindful of course, it's not going to sound the same because you have to take certain things out. So the reason I want to break that down is because Superheaven's guitars are extremely well done on the albums for what they're going for, but they're a lot different than a typical like rock guitar tone or like a pop punk sound where, you know, there's no denying that there's a lot of high ends in this, but you can't scoop the mids out entirely. They're using rat style pedals, a lot of fuzz pedals, which are very hard to work with live and can be very tricky to record as well if you're using them to this extent for rhythm guitars, I mean. And they're using like Green Russian big muffs, and they have like different Fuzz Roches stuff like the Rat Kings. I think it's the Cat King now, the same thing. They're basically old like different versions of Rat pedals. And these all have this kind of like saturated, fizzy, like, I don't mean fizzy in a bad way, but they have this quality to them. I'm sorry if people in the other room are talking loud, by the way. There's this sizzle that you want to get, and I hope you can hear. I'm just playing through my monitors right now. I'm not doing a lot of production on this because it's more about the talking points. But when you play it, there's got to be this high-end sizzle on top. The way that it saturates. And so the way that they do that, now I'm actually using my Helix, and I'm not really trying to use the gear that they did, but I'm going to give you 3 different things that they do, and you can kind of take your gear. And the whole point of this is not to tell you to go buy certain pieces of gear. It's to explain how you can try to dial in the sound using your ears and what you have at your disposal. Because let's face it, as much as I love certain bands, I'm not going to go buy every single piece of gear they've all used just to replicate their sound. It's just not practical. Okay, so the big three, or what I'm going to call this, the big three for Superheaven as far as pedals or like sounds goes are microamp, distortion, which is mostly a rat style, and fuzz. And they use different pedals. Like Taylor Madison especially is like a crazy like pedal guy. Like I just saw Webwing a little while ago, and I'm gonna go see him again in a week or two. I was looking at his pedals, and he's got like the full tone stuff going on, all kind of different. He's got all kind of crazy stuff. So he's very into pedals, into a clean amp. So I'm not going to say they used one specific pedal or this combination. I'm just going to break it down to the simplest form so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on here. So first and foremost, microamp. The MXR microamp, it's a pretty inexpensive pedal compared to what most things cost, especially used. It's a great little tool to have on the front of your board. Now you can't see here, I have an EP booster sitting on my pedal board below me. I was going to try to rip it off, but it's like tied down with Velcro and everything. The EP booster is a similar thing, but basically these are boost pedals. You can use different types of pedals to boost or a specific boost pedal, but basically you're boosting your clean signal into the front of your amp. I think Superheaven leaves the microamp on at all times. That's kind of what I do with my EP booster. It's not really an overdrive, it's a clean boost. It does something different, but it really does give a little bit of life to your sound, and you can tell the difference when you're playing with or without it. So that's the first thing, is if you're into pedals and stuff, maybe try to get a clean boost. There are inexpensive ways to do this, and I'm not going to give you a whole list of pedals here, but the microamp used is probably the best one. Or if you have an EP booster or some kind of other clean boost and Helix, their stuff, whatever you use, they're boosting the front. Now, the pickup I'm using here is just a Super Distortion by DiMarzio. It's a pretty stock, like, not stock, but a good up-the-middle rock pickup. It's actually the first ever aftermarket pickup, I believe. I like this for rock and heavy stuff because it's not too hot, but it's got enough output. So I chose this for this video. They were using combinations of different stuff. Taylor the Jazzmaster pickups, and Jake had like the wide range telly pickups, and they both had strats that had strat sized humbuckers, probably JB Juniors or something. So the pickups are kind of all over the place, and I'm just gonna say roll with what you got, and if you got a few different guitars, you know, see what works best for you. But boosting that clean signal is gonna help give you some life and give you a little push. The big thing with the distortion pedals, and I said the rat style, and I'll explain why, they need to have this kind of sizzle and this high end that I was talking about without being thin on the guitar side. You know, we play a chord, you know, it's a full chord, it's thick and nasty and not too muddy, but a little muddy in a good way, in a grungy, like kind of 90s rock way. But it still has that high end sizzle where it's almost fuzzy, and that's kind of what a rat will do for you. It's not quite fuzz. You can play more aggressive with it. You can palm mute a little bit with this, not like it won't sound like a fuzz. You know, but it's also not great for, like, you're not going to use this for like pop punk where, you know, because that kind of sizzly high end sounds kind of nasty when you're trying to do that. This is really for chordy, like real thick, big sounding stuff. It's very Smashing Pumpkins. Obviously they were using the big muffs from the op amp style, real high end, but trebly, but that's the kind of idea here. So if you don't have like a rat or a similar style distortion, I believe that, by the way, that they were using in the studio, I think they probably had old 1980s, like 84, like rats, which are more coveted. They had like Rat King and other Fuzz Rocha style stuff, which are similar circuits. But you know, there's tons and tons and tons of clones of this thing. I mean, Electro Harmonics makes a really good one that's like the I forget what it's called. It's orange. And then there's a bunch of rats. You can get rats real cheap, maybe $50 or so used. JHS makes like the Swiss Army knife of rats and other similar stuff. There's a really great Greer amps, one that's out now. It's kind of expensive. It sounds awesome. So, you know, you can buy those pedals, but really you can take, like, I'm using a a boosted like Marshall amp sim here. I'm not using a rat style pedal. I was going through them and I wanted to see if I can get something closer with the amp, since I didn't want you to have the pedal, right? And it has that kind of sound. You know, it's not perfect, but the point of this was not to be like some of my other videos where it's like how to get that sound. I really wanted to talk to people who are just trying to get something to play with, and then you can kind of use your ear and go from there. So really, if you're using your amp or some kind of distortion pedal into your amp, or a combination of both, you want to have a lot of treble, a lot of high end. You want to keep some mids in there and maybe take a little, kind of lower that bass, but play with it, because, depending on what gear you're using, too much bass out of it might make it sound too tin canny and trebly. Too much treble might do the same thing. You might have to kind of, find the right balance between your pickups and whatever you're using. I have just the drive at 4.7 here, so not even halfway. Bass at 2, mid at 2.6, treble at 7.7, presence at 5.2, and then the volumes I messed around with a little bit. And then the boost pedal in front of it is just like at 4.1, which isn't even noon. And the cab sim, I don't even know, what am I using? A Mesa? I have a Mesa 412 on one side and an Ubershaw cab on the other, which is really weird, but I just wanted to find something that simulated the sound a little well. So yeah. And then, when you have other songs where you're using distortion and maybe you feel like it's a little bit of a smoother sound, that oftentimes can be the mix and not the actual gear. Maybe something like I've Been Bored, there's some tones where they're maybe not as sharp as Jar. It's a different record. Then, you could take some of that high end down, or you take some of that mix down with whatever you're using between your pedals and your amps. With a rat pedal, it's going to have a filter, which basically is a reverse of a tone that works the opposite way. It gets bright, and you can kind of tell, okay, it's too bright or too dark. It really just depends on what you're using. But I would say just try to find a nice, where you're using a lot of mid-range and a lot of high end, and you're getting the sizzle, but you're still having a lot of body to the guitar. So the other thing that I brought up was Fuzz, and Fuzz is kind of a weird pedal because it's so touchy, and there's a lot of different fuzzes out there. I believe for a while they were using Swollen Pickles, which is an excellent fuzz pedal. It's by Way Huge. It's awesome. There's a lot of low end in it. A lot of fuzz pedals don't have quite the low end that, like a Russian Green Muff, which I have the Big Muff reissue of the Russian Green Muff, and it's awesome. I have actually a lot of fuzz pedals because I'm weird and like to try different ones that I don't use that often. But if you're using an actual fuzz pedal and you don't have like a really specific one, or you don't have one that has that much low end, you might have to put more low end in your guitar EQ, your amp, or whatever. But the fuzz that they use, it's more like on like Youngest Daughter is one that they'll use it on. It still has that kind of sizzly high end, which makes me think that they were blending the fuzz tracks with distorted like rat style tracks on some of these, especially on Jar. Like I really think that they were layering a lot of guitars, but it still has that, it's sizzly and it's thick and muddy, but still clear enough to hear the notes, and it's very mid-rangey. I try to use verbiage here to describe this, but guitar verbiage, it ends up just kind of sounding ridiculous, especially if you don't play and don't go on the forums or watch YouTube for this shit. But really what it is, it's a really thick, nasty, distorted tone where you're kind of taming it in a certain way where it's not too shrill, but it still has that kind of hot high end. That's really what it comes down to. Now, I do think that like Youngest Daughter is a great example of a song that is specifically supposed to be fuzz oriented versus like a song like you know, Sponge, where they're doing a lot more. Like, you can hear a Rat style. Like, when it's the isolated guitar after the drum intro, you can hear it's more Rat style. So I really think that there's kind of a fine line to kind of find balance there. If you're not going to go out and buy a bunch of gear, if you don't have a bunch of gear. Well, I'll say this, you could probably get away if you're going to buy only one pedal. The Rat pedal, to me, even just a regular one or like a copy of one, that's the way to go. Because the Fuzz is not going to get you through every situation with a band like Superheaven. Fuzz is awesome, but it has its limitations. And again, if you're just playing in your room, you can kind of mess around. Fuzz with a live band, unless you're using it for certain parts or leads, it can be really hard to cut through the mix. So a pedal like a Rat pedal will get you there, and you can make it a little more fuzzy when you need to until you get a Fuzz pedal. If you're using something like, you know, a Helix, then the world is, you know, endless there. There's so many limitless opportunities to dial in any tones. But I'm talking to a broad audience here. I don't know what you guys are working with, but I really don't think you need to go out and copy their pedal boards. There's two videos, one for Taylor, one for Jake, where it's like during Superheaven era, where you can see what pedals they were using and they go through their gear. But really, to me, it's just as simple as using your ear and learning how to play the songs and listening to the songs a lot. And you're going to hear these little things. You're going to hear the harmonic qualities and, okay, like, yeah, I need more distortion, I need more drive, I need more high end, or oh, it's too muddy, maybe take some of that out. Okay, the mids, more mids, more mids. People hate adding mids, but you gotta have it. I mean, you gotta have mids in there, especially for stuff like this. At least halfway, so not too much presence, but you still maybe need a little bit more presence. There's a lot to mess around with here. And, if you guys have questions, if I'm being helpful, which I hope I am, if I'm not, you can tell me and that's fine. But, shoot me a comment here or whatever, and I'll try to help you with going through the gear you have, or if you have specific questions, let me know. This is just kind of a general, let's talk about their tone and see if I can help you kind of find a starting point. So yeah, anyways, I hope this was a good starting point that helps you kind of get in the ballpark if you're looking to kind of play this stuff. Like I said earlier in the video, it is a lot different than like pop punk, or I know a lot of people start with like classic rock or punk rock or all this different stuff. And when you start getting into, like, Nirvana's a great band to get into with guitar, and they use similar stuff like this. But when you really start diving into some of that, 90s style stuff, or like, I know they like Taylor Loves Failure and there's all like great bands, and they're really geeky with their gear, and so it can be a lot harder than just plugging into your amp and then like, okay, how much gain do I need? So hopefully this is a good starting point. If there's anything else I can help, or if you have a specific question in regards to this, please leave a comment below. Like I said, I'm also always here for constructive criticism, but please keep in mind this was not me trying to match that tone verbatim. Maybe I'll do that video. If you guys want to see me try to match the tones to any specific songs, please let me know. But thanks again for watching. I'm happy to be back doing videos more regularly. And again, I have a new song coming out March 3rd. Video will be up March 2nd at noon Central Time. And you can pre-save it on Spotify with a link on my page. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys this week. Peace out.